Prologue, The Oath of Sigmar. The skies over Middenmoor were weeping black rain, thick and oily, like the world itself had begun to rot. Thunder cracked above the scorched remains of Fort Varenthal, once a proud bastion of the Empire's northern defense line. Now it stood desecrated, its towers broken, walls seething with corruption, banners of Sigmar torn and trampled in the mud. What remained of the garrison were bloodied fragments scattered like butchered game across the stone. In the courtyard, among corpses twisted by mutation and rot, knelt Eridor Varn. He was bound by rusted chains, thick links biting into the plate of his battered armor. Blood ran from his nose and mouth, mixing with the rain, but his golden eyes still burned with defiance. His once pristine white cloak was now a sodden rag streaked with crimson and ash, and his left pauldron bore a claw mark scorched into the metal by something not of this world. Before him stood Baron Drakwald Valthric, his liege lord, now adorned in midnight glue robes stitched with runes that crawled and shimmered with a sickly light. In his gauntleted hand he held the Tome of Thousand Veils, and the tendrils of raw magic flickered around him like serpents of light and shadow. "You betrayed us all," Eridor spat, his voice hoarse. The Baron tilted his head slightly, amused. "You speak of betrayal, knight, as though loyalty matters in the realm of Tzeentch. You swore an oath to Sigmar. I swore to victory. Mine is the only promise that endures." Behind him, a circle of robed acolytes chanted in a foul tongue, drawing complex glyphs of ever-changing geometry in the air. Blue flames erupted from the symbols, casting writhing shadows on the walls around them. The very air shimmered with the stench of sorcery, sulfur, burning ink, and the sweet rot of mutation. Eridor struggled as the Baron approached, holding up an ornate helm, blackened steel etched with screaming faces and adorned with twin horns that spiraled in opposite directions. Its mouthpiece gaped like a maw, and the interior pulsed with an unnatural light. "This helm," Valthric said with reverence, "was forged in the nightmares of the architect of fate himself. Your soul will make a fine vessel for its hunger." With a wave of his hand, he summoned forth a flammer of Tzeentch, a creature of living warp flame and twisted mirth. Its eyes, multiple and unblinking, fixed on Eridor as it slithered closer, its tendrils crackling with sorcerous fire. The acolyte's chant rose to a crescendo. Eridor roared his last prayer to Sigmar as the flamer plunged a clawed hand into his chest. His scream echoed across the ruined keep, blending with the howl of the wind and the maddening laughter of the demon. His heart was charred black within seconds, his body convulsing as the warp fire consumed him from the inside out. The flames did not stop at death, they devoured his identity, burning his name from the ledger of life. His flesh turned to ash, his bones to smoke, but his soul screamed, tethered not to the afterlife, but to the helm that now hovered in the air, suspended between reality and the realm of chaos. Valthric placed the cursed helm upon the headless remains. The wind died. The flames extinguished. A moment of stillness. Then, with a thunderous crack, the earth split beneath the courtyard. A nightmare steed of coal-black flesh and molten eyes burst from the chasm. The horse reared, its scream a chorus of 1,000 damned souls. Upon it, a rider rose. A suit of scorched armor, still bearing the lion sigil of House Varn, now twisted and warped. The cursed helm floated inches above where a head should be, veiled in eternal blue fire. His sword, once forged in Altdorf for the defense of the Empire, had become a jagged thing of obsidian and bone, hissing with unholy runes. The Headless Horseman had risen. He turned to Valthric, whose smirk faltered. But the pact had been made. The curse was sealed. Eridor's vengeance would not be swift, for time itself now bowed to the will of Tzeentch. He would ride through centuries, slaying, not at random, but with purpose. He would hunt the wicked, those who served chaos, and one day his blade would find Valthric. The steed reared again, hooves striking sparks from the broken stone, and with a howl like a tempest, the horseman vanished into the storm. Some say his scream still echoes through the Drakwald on moonless nights. Some say he rides still, and all who serve the Changer of Ways whisper one name in fear: Eridor. The oath of Sigmar was broken, but his vengeance had just begun. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Mist. The Drakwald forest was a place of ancient menace. Its towering, gnarled trees choked the sky and whispered to one another in creaks and moans when the wind swept through their dying limbs. For centuries, superstitious villagers had kept their distance, offering prayers to Tal and Sigmar at its borders. Yet something new stirred in the woods, something worse than beastmen, worse than bandits, something that rode. The village of Krugenheim lay just a league from the forest's edge, its sagging rooftops and rain-soaked streets caught in the damp grip of perpetual fog. The people there had always been hardened folk, trappers, charcoal burners, and pious laborers with backs like oaks, but now every face bore the same haunted look, wide eyes, tight lips, and glances over the shoulder as if shadows had grown teeth. They called it the Nebel, the dark mist, and in that unnatural fog they whispered, "Road, a headless night." It began with animals. Dogs howling through the night before vanishing without a trace. Livestock gutted in their pens, their bodies twisted and burned, as though some unseen fire had licked through their flesh without touching the hay. Then came the screams, heard in the hours between midnight and dawn. Screams of terror, pain, and something else, something like madness. Old Frau Brandt was the first to speak of it aloud. She stood in the village square, a bony finger trembling as she cried, "I saw him, a knight with no head, riding a horse blacker than midnight. Fire poured from its hooves and smoke from its nostrils. He looked at me, and he had no eyes." The villagers scoffed, laughed, muttered about senility and too much schnapps, until the killings began. 3 men, woodsmen, found hacked to pieces near the forest trail. Their limbs were scattered in impossible directions, arms twisted until the bone burst through the skin, heads crushed like melons. One had his own axe driven into his spine, handle first. Blood soaked the path for yards, and a single hoofprint deep, scorched into the earth, steam despite the frost. Then came Father Gorsh. A faithful priest of Sigmar, Gorsh had declared the tale's heresy. He rode out with torch and hammer to bless the forest's edge. Only his horse returned. The beast was half mad, eyes wild, skin steaming with some unseen heat. Its hooves bled, its flanks bore burns shaped like cursed runes, and tied to its saddle was a bundle of entrails wrapped in Father Gorsh's bloodied robe. By then no one laughed. They began to speak in low voices. In taverns they muttered of a night betrayed and bound by magic too terrible to name. They recalled the old tales, the ones from Middenmoor, long buried in the dust of history. They spoke of Eridor Varn, the noble turned revenant, slain by his own lord and given to the Changer of Ways. They spoke of vengeance and flame and the cursed helm that now wandered without a head beneath it. And the fog thickened. Each night it crept farther from the forest, curling through the fields and into the very bones of the village. Children screamed in their beds, old men wept in their sleep, and more people claimed to hear hoofbeats in the dark. Not the slow rhythm of a cart horse, but the thunderous charge of war, of judgment, coming for the wicked. Then came Ulrich Schenk, the blacksmith. He was found nailed to his own forge, his body crucified with iron tongs through wrists and ankles. His eyes had been melted out, yet his face was twisted in a grin of ecstasy, as if he'd seen something divine. Scorched into the wall beside him were words in ancient Reichspiel. "He comes for the oathbreakers." It was the merchant Klaus Jutner who broke first. He confessed, half-drunk and screaming, that he'd once sold weapons to a traveling band of men who bore the mark of Tzeentch hidden under cloaks and coin. He'd laughed it off. Business was business. He hanged himself the next morning. But his body wasn't left alone. By dawn, it was gone. And at the center of the village square, right where Frau Brandt had first spoken her warning, someone, or something, had impaled Jutner's corpse atop the fountain. Not cleanly. The iron spire had been driven through his abdomen. His body hung like a grotesque banner. Carved into his chest in deep, jagged gouges were the words, "Oathbreaker." From that day on, no one dared walk alone. Doors were locked. Shrines were built. The town elder sent messengers to the temple of Sigmar in Altdorf, begging for aid. Few believed the tales. But in the dark woods of Drakwald, a faint blue flame burned through the mists, and the sound of hooves, relentless, echoing, coming ever closer, never stopped. Chapter 2. The Raven Mark. The body hung from the rafters of the chapel like a grotesque banner, arms splayed wide, bones visible beneath torn flesh. Candles flickered against blood-slicked stone walls, illuminating the sigil carved into the man's chest, a twisting spiral of flame and feather, etched deep, as if the blade that made it had burned and sliced at once. It was a mark of Tzeentch, unmistakable, undeniable. Witch-hunter Silas Drom stood silently beneath the corpse, cloaked in his oil-dog coat, the silver Inquisition seal dangling from his breast. His gaunt face was half-shrouded by the brim of his hat, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned every inch of the scene. His right hand rested near the butt of the flintlock pistol on his hip. The other held a piece of parchment inscribed with warding runes. The chapel stank of copper, rot, and incense, a futile effort to mask the filth that clung to every inch of the sanctuary. This was the third murder in as many days. Each victim was strung up, marked, and mutilated. Each bore the same raven mark. He'd seen it before. Once, in the ruins of a monastery near Nordland, where the monks had gouged out their own eyes after scribbling prophecies in blood. Once, in the tunnels of Talabheim, where a nest of Tzeentch cultists had bred children with second mouths hidden beneath their ribs. And now, in Kugenheim, he approached the corpse slowly. The man had been a scribe, nothing special, but the parchment clutched in his severed hand caught Silas's attention. He pried it loose gently, ignoring the blackened fingers that snapped away like twigs. The scroll was half-burned, the ink swirling and rearranging itself as he looked at it. "Spell-form glyphs," he muttered. "Language of change." He didn't need a priest to tell him this chapel had been defiled. He could feel it in his marrow. Tzeentch was near. He turned as his apprentice Erwin Kloss stumbled in, pale and wide-eyed. "Sir," Erin whispered, "another, at the granary, same markings." Silas narrowed his eyes. "We ride? Saddle the horses?" The granary was a slaughterhouse. Burlap sacks were torn open, grain soaked with blood and guts, rats, swollen and twitching, fed on flesh that pulsed like it still lived. Bodies, 3 this time, were stacked in the shape of a pyramid. Each had been flayed, and their skins hung like drapes across the rafters. Overhead on the wall, the raven mark blazed in blood and soot, a great eye ringed with feathers and jagged fire, its gaze following all who entered. "What madness is this?" Erwin whispered. Silas stepped forward, scanning the scene with a hunter's precision. One of the corpses had been posed, fingers pointing, tongue nailed to the chest. He followed the direction of the hand to a trapdoor hidden beneath the grain. Erwin hesitated, but Silas kicked it open. A ladder descending into black. Lanterns lit, They descended. The cellar was deeper than it should have been, far deeper. As they moved downward, the stone became bone, the air thick with incense and bile, until they stepped into a catacomb. Books floated mid-air, pages fluttering like wings. Chains adorned with teeth lined the walls, and in the center an altar of flesh, stitched from hundreds of different victims, twitching, breathing, groaning. On it sat a mirror. Oval, bound in brass, shaped like tentacles and feathers, it shimmered with a blue light, and reflected not their faces, but their fears. Erwin screamed as he saw himself, a hanged man, his eyes weeping maggots. Silas clenched his teeth. The mirror showed him standing in burning armor, his pistol aimed at a boy, his own son, eyes alight with warp flame. "No," Silas growled. He pulled a vial of sanctified oil from his coat and hurled it onto the mirror. The flames erupted, blue first, then red, then something that screamed as it died. The altar writhed, split open, and from its depths a single feather drifted upward. Large as a man's arm, black as midnight with streaks of shimmering green and blue, it landed on Silas's palm and burned. He staggered back as the symbol of the raven mark seared itself into his glove through leather and skin. He bit down a scream as veins in his wrist bulged and blackened, but he did not fall. When it was done, the mark remained, not on his hand, but etched into the fabric of reality around him. The message. "You are seen." Behind him, Erwin sobbed quietly. "Sir, what is this?" Silas didn't answer at first. He holstered his pistol. His eyes were distant. "It is a calling card," he said finally. "A sign." "Tzeentch?" "No." His voice was like ice cracking. "Worse." He looked at the dying altar. "It's a message for the one who rides." Chapter 3. The Rider Strikes. The road to Altdorf wound through the craggy hill country like a worm through rot, skirting the edges of the dreaded Drakwald forest. Few dared travel its length without armed guards, but Gruber's guild caravan feared nothing, armed to the teeth, laden with silk and spices from distant Araby, and led by Hermann Gruber, a man whose soul weighed heavier in coin than conscience. The caravan moved under the shroud of twilight. 12 wagons, 6 mounted guards, and 2 mercenary road priests of Moor. Their torches sputtered in the thickening mist, casting dancing shadows over the moss-draped trees. Gruber himself, fat and swaddled in fox furs, sat in a gilt coach at the center of the train, sipping spiced wine and smirking to himself. His last business venture had earned him a full wagon-load of gold, confiscated from a village razed after false reports of chaos cult activity. The villagers had pleaded, cried, even offered their children in exchange for mercy. It left their bodies in a ditch. Now he rode in luxury, his sins trailing behind like the dust from his wheels. And the mist began to move. It wasn't natural fog. It flowed, slithering like it had a will of its own. It poured across the trail, drowning torchlight in choking dampness. Horses snorted, stamping nervously. The lead scout signaled a halt. "What is it now?" Gruber barked through his carriage slit. "Something's not right." Steele screamed. The scout's head flew through the air, his neck spraying blood like a geyser as his horse reared and bolted. A second guard barely turned before something black and burning slammed into him with the force of a war hammer, sending his torso spiraling away from his legs in a burst of gore. Through the mist, the sound of hooves rang out, slow, heavy, deliberate. And then from the wall of fog, he emerged. A monstrous steed, its flesh the color of cooled lava, smoke snorting from its flared nostrils, flame dripping from its eyes. Upon its back sat a suit of blackened armor, scorched and cracked, empty above the collar, headless, save for the cursed helm that floated just above the neck, veiled in blue witchfire. In his hand the rider bore a blade unlike any mortal weapon, jagged, warped, and screaming. The blade hummed with a vile intelligence, its surface crawling with runes that bled light. The Headless Horseman had returned. The guards rallied, shouting battle cries and charging. Crossbows snapped, bolts flying toward the apparition. They never landed. The horseman swept his blade once, and the air itself split. A shockwave of force shattered the first two wagons, splinters ripping through flesh and hide alike. One guard was sliced in half vertically, his organs tumbling like fruit from a ruptured sack. The priests of Mor began chanting litanies, holy symbols raised. One ignited into ash mid-prayer. The other dropped to his knees, blood pouring from every orifice, whispering, "He sees me! He sees me!" before his head twisted completely backwards, neck snapping like twine. Screaming now, the merchants ran. They didn't get far. The horseman rode through the chaos with uncanny silence, his blade rising and falling in elegant, horrifying rhythm. Each stroke cleaved men from horses, heads from shoulders, and one man cleanly from crotch to collarbone. A woman trying to flee fell as her own shadow rose up and strangled her. Tzeentch's taint, crawling through reality itself. Gruber's carriage rocked violently. He scrambled to the back, face pale, grasping for a pistol. The door ripped off its hinges, tossed aside like paper. The horseman stood at the threshold. Gruber raised the pistol and fired. The shot struck the horseman square in the chest. The bullet hissed, then melted. The horseman lifted his sword. Gruber sobbed, crawling backwards. I didn't know. I thought they were heretics." No words came from the rider, only the blue fire of the helm flaring brighter, like judgment given form. He brought the sword down. The carriage split in half, Gruber's body tumbling out, torn open from shoulder to groin. When it was over, the road was silent save for the crackle of burning wagons. Blood pooled in the ruts, thick and steaming. The mists began to withdraw, curling back into the trees like a satisfied predator. And high above, seared into a shattered wagon board, was the raven mark. A message? A promise. He rides again. Chapter 4. Blood and Dust. The winds of the Drakwald howled like mourning mothers, scouring the corpse-strewn road where Gruber's caravan once rolled with pride and excess. All that remained now were charred bones, gutted wagons, and the thick, coppery stench of death soaked into the earth like a curse. Even the crows refused to descend. 3 days later, a band of rangers from Fort Hergig rode in to investigate the silence. What they found turned even hardened veterans pale. Blackened rib cages jutted from the soil like blasphemous sculptures. One man had been crucified upside down from a tree, his own entrails used to form the symbol of the raven mark on the bark. The ashes of the carriage burned with runes that still whispered faintly, as if some echo of magic clung to the char. And beneath a shattered wheelbarrow, barely breathing, they found a man. He was a mess of blood and burns, face half gone, legs shattered, but still somehow clinging to life. His name, once rasped out between vomited blood and broken teeth, was Thomas Eckhart, a scribe in Gruber's employ. He wasn't expected to survive the ride back. But he did, and what he told them made every torch burn colder in the fort's chapel hall. Silas Drum watched Thomas from the shadows of the candle-lit chamber. The survivor lay propped on a cot, shaking, his limbs twitching randomly like the tendons were being yanked by unseen fingers. His mouth bubbled when he breathed, and his left eye had been replaced by a crystalline orb, a lingering gift of warp fire. "Tell me again," Silas demanded, voice low, dangerous. Thomas stared at him with that glimmering eye, and whimpered. He didn't just kill them, he judged them. What do you mean? He came through the mist like a wraith on a burning steed. Cut down the guards in seconds, gods. They didn't even scream long. He ignored the wagons full of riches, ignored the gold. He went straight for Gruber. The others tried to flee. He hunted them down, one by one. I saw him, stop beside Johann, our accountant. Looked at him, even though he had no head. I swear to Sigmar he looked at him, and raised that blade. Johann started pleading, said he was a loyal man, said he was innocent. Tomas turned his head and began to laugh, a shrill, broken sound. He was a spy for a cult, worshipped Tzeentch. We all knew. He even wore a feathered charm beneath his shirt, but no one said anything. It was safer. Gruber paid well, and after all, the cult paid more. Silas' jaw tightened. You served chaos? No, Tomas wheezed. I didn't serve. I just looked away, pretended not to hear the sermons. Didn't protest when they sent crates marked with false seals to Null. Didn't stop them when they bought sacrifices for some ritual in the woods. His voice cracked into something pitiful. I didn't help them, but I didn't stop them either. And the rider spared you. Thomas blinked. I don't know why. Maybe because I screamed, maybe because I ran. Maybe he wanted someone left behind to tell, to warn. Silas leaned in, eyes like sharpened flint. Warn. Tomas looked up, and the raven mark began to bleed across his chest. Not from ink, not from blood, but from the skin itself. It carved itself into his flesh, line by line, glowing with cold blue light. Tomas convulsed, frothing at the mouth, and shrieked as if every nerve were on fire. You seize the betrayers? Tomas shrieked. Those who serve chaos, those who aid them, those who look the other way. The room exploded in a wave of spectral pressure. Candles snuffed out. A holy icon of Sigmar cracked down the middle. And Tomas fell still, eyes wide, mouth frozen in the shape of one final word. Right after the body was disposed of, Silas stood alone in the chamber. He traced the raven mark burned into the stone wall behind the cot. He now understood what had returned. The horseman was not a mindless revenant. He was vengeance with purpose, not against the innocent, not even against the merely sinful, but against the oathbreakers, the enablers of chaos. Against the quiet betrayals, the compromised hands, the fearful silences. Silas narrowed his eyes, and for the first time since Altdorf burned in his visions, he felt something close to kinship. Chapter 5. The Mask of Lies. By the fourth bell of night, Silas Drom had followed the trail of ink and ichor to its newest wretched end, Grunwald Manor. Set atop a jagged ridge northeast of Krugenheim, the manor's once proud silhouette now hunched like a withered corpse against the moonlight. Ivy strangled its balustrades, windows glinted like watching eyes. Silas approached on foot, his boots crunching the frostbitten grass. The mist here was unnatural. It clung not just to the earth, but to the mind, thick with whispers, illusions, lies. Behind him, Erwin Kloth trembled silently, eyes darting to every shadow. "Sir," he whispered, "this place feels wrong." Silas gave no reply, only tightened his grip on the witch-steel blade sheathed across his back, and stepped through the towering iron gate, its rusted hinges groaning like mourners. Inside, the manor pulsed with twilight opulence. Gold and velvet lined the walls. Tapestries showed scenes of imperial valor, of Sigmar's hammer striking down the wicked. But closer inspection revealed subtle changes. The hammer's shadow curled like a tentacle. The wicked bore avian eyes, and Sigmar's face had been replaced with a mask of shifting symbols. Beneath this glamour, Silas felt it. The taint of sorcery, the breath of Tzeentch. In the grand ballroom, nobility mingled. Lords and ladies of Rakeland, Hokeland, Talabicland, all dressed in feathers, veils, and silk, a masquerade of peacocks and ravens. Laughter echoed, cold, hollow, too perfect. Their eyes sparkled with more than wine. One turned to him. A noble woman in a midnight gown, her mask, shaped like a crescent moon, split in two. "Master Drum," she said, her voice coiling like perfume. "What a surprise! Come to dance with the court of illusions?" He said nothing, only held up a scroll, Tomas's final confession, signed in shaking blood. Her smile twitched. "You see shadows where there are none," she said. "Would you really accuse this court of nobility of consorting with Chaos Witch Hunter? It's treason." "I'd sooner accuse the Son of Rising," Silas growled. "You wear your heresy like silk." The music shifted, flutes twisting into shrieks, violins mimicking screams. The crowd grew still, heads turning towards Silas. And the masks began to change. The porcelain cracked. Feathers molted. Beneath them, warped faces stared back, some with eyes blooming like tumors, others with no mouths, only gaping holes that whispered blasphemies. One nobleman's chest opened like a book, glyphs glowing along ribs shaped like runes. "Tzeentch sees you," they intoned in unison. Silas moved before they finished. Gunfire roared. The first cultist, a masked woman, took a holy round between the eyes. Her body burst like a blood-filled wineskin, splattering corrupted wine and worms across the floor. Erwin unleashed flame from a purity brazier, catching two as they lunged. They screamed, their masks melting, flesh sloughing into avian beaks and feathered limbs as they burned alive. More charged, no longer noblemen but warped horrors. One leapt with talons where hands should be. Silas ducked, unsheathing his blade and slicing upward. The creature's jaw split vertically, teeth multiplying before its head flew from its shoulders, trailing ichor that burned the carpet. Chaos erupted. Paintings screamed as fire consumed them, marble cracked with the wailing of imprisoned spirits. Cultists howled and contorted into mockeries of humanity, some exploding into flocks of screaming birds, others collapsing into piles of writhing tongues and fingernails. Erwin fell, gutted from behind. Silas caught him, shoving a sanctified blade into the eye of the beast who did it. It screamed as it combusted, bones dancing mid-air like marionettes before vanishing into cinders. Only one remained. A tall figure in gold robes, face hidden behind a half-mask, shaped like a raven's beak. "You've disrupted the rite," he hissed. "The raven mark was not for you." Silas stepped forward, bleeding, breathing like a furnace. "I follow where it leads, and it led me here." The figure raised his arms, summoning a maelstrom of shifting runes, a storm of pure magic, impossible to follow with the eye. But Silas threw his last blessed dagger. It struck the cult leader's chest. The runes stopped. The man stumbled, tearing off his mask. Beneath it his face was his own, a nobleman from Altdorf, a former advisor to the emperor's court, a man declared dead 15 years ago in a riot. "No," he gasped. "You don't understand. We serve him because he sees all. He is the storm, the flame, the quill. He knows your sin, witch hunter." Silas didn't wait. He fired again. The back of the man's skull burst against the wall in a splash of red and gray. Silence returned. Erwin groaned, alive but bleeding. Silas lifted him, ignoring the pain lancing his own side. The ballroom flickered, gold and velvet peeling away to reveal rot, blood, and sigils carved in bone. The mask of lies was gone, and behind it, truth waited. Chapter 6. Witchfire at Moor's Hollow. Dawn never truly came to Moor's Hollow. The village sat sunken in the armpit of a forgotten valley, veiled in shadows even at midday, surrounded by bone orchards and the bleached remnants of ancient grave markers. Named for the god of death, It was once a sacred resting place, watched over by quiet monks and censer-swinging priests. Now it reeked of rot and witch-fire. As Silas Drom and a half-dozen torch-bearing militia approached the edge of the hamlet, the air thickened into a foul soup, sweet and sulfuric, like spoiled incense. Overhead, the sky churned with unnatural hues, indigo, crimson, plague yellow, like a bruise across the heavens. The wind whispered names and lies, laughter and sobs, too fast to separate. "Empress breath," one of the militiamen whispered, clutching his charm of Sigmar. The path to the chapel was littered with black feathers, each one twitching as if still alive. On the far hill the graveyard had been unearthed, caskets clawed open from the inside, bones lay scattered, arranged in runes that burned without flame. Silas raised his hand, motioning for silence. The screams began soon after. They came from the rectory, once a sanctified dormitory for the caretakers of the dead. The building now pulsed with chaotic energy, its stones shifting subtly, as though reality warped around it. The moment they breached the door, madness exploded. A monk, or what had once been one, charged them, his mouth gaping open from ear to ear, a snake-like tongue slapping the air. Militiaman Gunter fired his musket, blowing the creature's jaw off. But instead of dying, the monk's face folded inward, birthing a tendril of flame that wrapped around Gunter's throat and yanked him into the air. Gunter screamed as his skin peeled in layers, falling like paper into the black stone floor. Silas threw a vial of sanctified oil, shattering it against the aberration. Fire erupted in screaming blue tongues, reducing it to ash and silence. More came. A woman with 4 arms, each hand clutching a different blasphemous relic, hurled bolts of warp energy. 2 militia were torn in half, bone corkscrewing from flesh as their bodies twisted in the air like meat puppets. Silas shot her through the eye. Her skull cracked open like a melon, oozing sapphire fire and crawling ink. They pressed deeper, the screams growing worse. At the chapel's core, surrounded by a ring of skulls and bones suspended mid-air in a perfect circle, sat a child. A girl, maybe 8, dressed in a mourner's shift, her eyes replaced with glowing orbs, her fingers coated in dried blood. Around her danced flames of blue, green, and black, flames that didn't burn but whispered in Tzeentch's voice. She turned toward Silas. "He comes," she said, in a voice like 1,000 insects chirping in unison. "The oath is broken. The storm rides." Silas approached slowly, ignoring the pain in his ribs, the seeping wound on his thigh. "What is your name, girl?" he asked. She giggled. "Not mine. Whose?" The flames around her roared upward, forming the shape of a rider on a burning steed. The skulls exploded one by one, fire licking the altar as shadows took on faces. And then the child whispered. "Eridor." A pulse shot through the chapel. The glass shattered, the walls bled. The very earth moaned as if struck. Silas staggered. Erwin, limping but alive, gasped. "That's his name. The horseman. Eridor." Before they could react, the child's body jerked violently. Her back arched, her mouth stretching unnaturally wide. She began to scream. From her throat poured a torrent of witchfire, igniting the air. The chapel went up like dry kindling, the pillars cracking, ceiling raining molten stone. Silas grabbed Erwin and pulled him through the flames, just as the entire rectory exploded behind them, a shock wave of reality scorching heat flattening the trees. They rolled into the mud outside, coughing and half-blind. Behind them the hollow burned. A pillar of fire, etched with the raven mark, spiraled into the sky. Screaming faces danced in the flames, and at the center, for one brief moment, a headless figure astride a black steed appeared, wreathed in fire and vengeance, before vanishing. Silas stared at the inferno. "Eridor," he said. The name was a wound, a curse, a promise. Chapter 7. Dreams of the Past. Order did not sleep. The Headless Horseman did not know rest in the human sense. But when the mists of night thickened, and the stars wheeled overhead like spinning blades, something darker often crept into the fractured mind beneath the cursed helm. And in that shadowed place, he dreamed, not of peace, not of death, but of betrayal again and again, as the changer of ways sank his talons into his soul, peeling back memory like skin from meat. The first dream began as a flicker of warmth. A boy in silver armor, a banner of the twin-tailed comet fluttering above a snowy hill. Ser Eridor Varn, loyal knight of the Empire, riding beside his lord, Baron Valtryek, to defend the border villages from Chaos raiders. He remembered the sun on his cheek, the cheer of peasants, the truth in his heart. Then the sky turned black. Snow melted into boiling blood, running down the hills like wine. Peasants' faces became beaked masks, their eyes seething with arcane symbols. The banner twisted, the comet spiraled in on itself, and the voice of Tzeentch whispered, "Loyalty is the greatest illusion." Audric turned to Valtryek, only to see his liege's face melt into 1,000 others. Nobles, merchants, cultists, all smiling, all wearing Eridor's own face. The second dream was the battlefield. Smoke thick as wool, the roar of war, the clash of metal. He stood again upon the walls of Fort Varenthal, blade in hand, bloodied but defiant. His men cried for salvation. Tzeentchian horrors poured over the walls, beast-headed fiends, warriors whose limbs became serpents, daemons of flame and feather. And then he saw them, his fellow knights, backs turned, riding away, abandoning him, Valtryek among them. "No!" Eridor screamed, voice still his own, his real voice, deep and noble. "We swore the oath. We made the oath." From the battlements, a chorus replied, not his men, not chaos spawn, but children, their faces twisted in fear and betrayal, sobbing. "You let us burn," said Heridor. He turned and saw the chapel aflame. Inside it, villagers, hundreds, trapped, screaming. He rushed forward, but the ground beneath him melted into pages of his own memories, written in blood. The text rearranged itself, became a mouth, then 1,000, each whispering, "You let them die. You did nothing." The third dream was worst. He stood within a cathedral made of his own bones, towering spires carved from rib cages, stained glass windows depicting his crimes, failures, and sins. In the center, atop a throne of molten helms, sat Tzeentch, not in a single form, but ever-shifting. A great eye blinking in the void. A robed scholar with a serpent's smile. A jester with blades for fingers. A mother with a child's voice. And then, Valtryek again, whole, smiling. "My good knight," Valtryek said, cradling the cursed helm. "You've never stopped serving me. You are vengeance, yes, but also my proof, my legacy, a monument to the futility of loyalty." He placed the helm back on Ird's shoulder. "Ride, specter. Ride forever. And remember, every soul you reap sings my name." The flames returned, devouring the cathedral. Screams echoed from the walls, his own voice multiplied, torn apart, stitched together again by madness. Eridor woke, if it could be called waking. The world was mist and shadow, trees leaning like mourners in a graveyard of ash. His steed pawed the earth. No bloodied battlefield, no cultist lair, no battlefield. Just a quiet forest where the wind sobbed like a grieving widow. He stood beneath a dead tree, his armor scorched and steaming. His blade hummed at his side. The helm, floating inches above where a head should be, glowed softly. A cruel, knowing glow. For a moment the rider did not move. Then he did. He turned toward the east, where chaos brewed in the hearts of men, where oathbreakers walked the cobbled streets with smiles. And he rode. Into the dark, into the dust, into memory, into vengeance. Chapter 8. Forge of Madness. Deep beneath the blackened ruins of old Halgo Keep, a place long erased from imperial maps, a fire burned that should have died centuries ago. It wasn't the fire of forge or hearth. It was warp flame, eternal, living and screaming. This was the Forge of Madness. Here, in the lightless guts of the keep, a circle of robed cultists chanted beneath a vaulted chamber sculpted from charred stone and fused bone. Every surface was etched in chaotic runes that pulsed with unnatural life. Chains hung from the ceilings like entrails, some still twitching. The air was thick with blood steam and molten air, scorching the lungs of even the most devoted. At the center of the forge, driven into a pedestal of obsidian, was a blade. Merath's edge. It was no mortal weapon. Its surface shimmered like liquid shadow, the edges curling in and out of reality. Runes carved into its length crawled, ever-changing, whispering the names of those it had slain and those it would. Smoke rose from the very stone it touched, the temperature around it warping, causing the walls to sweat blood. And it hungered. "Bring forth the vessel," hissed High Cantor Varn, the lead cultist, his mouth sewn shut save for a vertical slit at the center that moved like a serpent's tongue. His eyes had long since burned away, replaced by two gleaming orbs of polished lapis lazuli. Two acolytes dragged a young man forward, bare-chested, sobbing, his skin tattooed with inked spirals that twisted with his every breath. "This is madness," he cried. "Please, I was promised initiation, not sacrifice." "Every blade drinks blood," Varn rasped, gesturing. The cultists began to chant, words folding upon themselves, syllables birthing mutations in sound, phrases that twisted in the mind like splinters. The forge roared. Merath's edge pulsed in reply. The moment the sacrificial blade touched the man's chest, the air exploded. Flesh peeled in layers, spiraling upward like ribbons, sucked into the sword. His screams lasted too long, echoing in triplicate, as his body was devoured by the will of the weapon. When it ended, only a black smear remained. No bones, no ash. Only power. And the blade glowed brighter. Varn turned to his brethren. "The rider rides with purpose. He slays not for vengeance alone, he slays by will, divine, precise, punishing." Acolytes bowed their warped heads. "We cannot destroy him," he continued. "He is flame-given judgment. But Merath's edge is older than him. It is a relic born in the black forges of the Screaming Spire, tempered in the blood of daemon princes. It can pierce his curse, it can chain his soul." Another cultist, face like melted wax, voice fractured, asked, "And who will wield it?" Varn stepped forward, baring his arms, each one a tapestry of binding glyphs, some bleeding. "I will. I have seen the path in the fires. Tzeentch showed me the moment, when the rider hesitates, when his flame flickers." He grasped the hilt of Merath's edge. The blade sang, not in joy, but in hunger. It drove itself into his palm, roots of metal sprouting from the hilt and plunging into his arm, twisting his flesh like rope. Varn did not scream. He laughed. Blue fire consumed him. His body writhed, his spine cracked backward, limbs snapping, reforming, stretching. A second head began to grow from his shoulder. Wings of tattered parchment burst from his back, inscribed with forbidden prophecy. The sword had accepted him. Now the cult had their champion. As the forge groaned beneath their triumphant howls, A whisper threaded through the air, one not spoken by man or daemon, but carried on the unseen wind. A voice like a blade dragged across bone. You seek to chain fire, you will only be consumed. And though they did not see him, far away atop a ridge of dead trees the horseman watched, his helm glowing, his blade ready. Eridor knew they had touched something they shouldn't have. Now they would pay. Chapter 9. The Librarium Arcanum. Beneath the catacombs of Nuln, behind vaults warded with sanctified lead and silver-mirrored wards, there was a door no one spoke of. It bore no handle, no hinges. Only a sigil of flame and ink carved into black stone, pulsing softly with an inner light that refused to die. It was said the door had not been built, but breathed into existence by a dying witch hunter whose mind shattered after glimpsing the true nature of Tzeentch. Silas Drom stood before it now, his gloved hand trembling slightly as he pressed the edge of a blessed coin into the symbol. A sound like a scream choked in ink echoed through the catacombs. The stone slid aside with a whisper, revealing a darkness so complete it made the torchlight behind him flicker. The Librarium Arcanum awaited. The chamber beyond was alive. Rows upon rows of books stretched into eternity, not on shelves, but suspended mid-air, bound by chains of silver and shadow. The air reeked of mildewed vellum, scorched blood, and the faint perfume of nightmares. Some books whispered, others wept. One pulsed like a beating heart. At the far end, upon a pedestal carved from obsidian vertebrae, rested a tome bound in flayed skin, its surface writhing as if still aware. It was known as Veritas in Flamma, the truth in flame, a grimoire said to contain the final truths of those devoured by chaos. Silas approached, ignoring the sudden pounding in his skull. Every step sent voices crawling through his thoughts, some pleading, some laughing, others offering him names and secrets in exchange for just a glance inside. He reached out. The moment his fingers touched the cover, his breath caught. The skin grasped him. Needles of ink stabbed into his palm, and the book opened itself, pages fluttering wildly, revealing impossible diagrams, spells penned in blood, and illustrations that moved like dreams. A man becoming a tree screaming leaves. A baby swallowing stars. A knight without a head, standing on a battlefield of faces that all bore his own. The pages stopped on a passage glowing with unholy fire. The curse of the oathbreaker, the soul fire bind. Silas read, lips moving silently. A soul wronged and sacrificed in betrayal, a knight of unshakable honor, twisted into a revenant of divine punishment, bound by a helm forged with the breath of Tzeentch himself. It fed on justice, but warped it, turning vengeance into a cycle, an Ouroboros of fire and blood. And yet, there was a way to sever the curse. Not through steel, not through banishment, but redemption. The knight's soul could be reclaimed if he performed one act of selfless justice, an act not born from wrath, vengeance, or command, but from true, chosen mercy. Silas leaned back, sweat beading his brow. The book snapped shut. "Mercy," he whispered. Could something so ancient, so broken, even understand mercy? Could Eridor, the Headless Horseman, who slaughtered without pause, who judged like a living storm, even comprehend forgiveness? But he had to try. For in the margin, scrawled in an ink that had bled through the vellum itself, was a warning. If he is not redeemed, he will become the blade of the changer, and all justice shall burn. Silas turned to leave, and the librarium itself screamed. A figure burst from the shadows, once a scholar, now a husk, twisted by exposure to the tome's truth. Its skin sloughed in strips, revealing a face that wept ink. Its hands had become quills, long and jagged. Truth is not yours to steal, it howled, voice like shredding parchment. It lunged. Silas drew his pistol and fired into its face, the blessed round tearing through the ink flesh with a gout of fire and black ichor. But the thing did not die. It split, forming two smaller monstrosities, each screeching as they crawled along the walls like spiders. Silas hurled a lantern. Flames consumed the shadows. Books shrieked as the fire licked their bindings. Knowledge wailed. He ran, the screams of damned words following him out of the vault, through the closing door. The black stone slammed shut behind him. Silas collapsed, breathing hard, the mark of the book still smoldering in his palm. He knew now. There was only one path forward. Eridor must choose mercy, and that meant finding a soul still within the flame. Chapter 10. Riding with Shadows. The dead tree stood alone in the clearing like a blackened finger pointed at the gods. Beneath it, the mist thickened, twisting, curling, coiling inward until the world shrank to a single breath. And then it came. Hoofbeats, slow, rhythmic, as if death itself had learned to march. Silas Drom waited, still as stone, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his ears. The clearing around him pulsed with tension. The air grew colder, but his skin prickled with heat, a paradox of presence. Out of the mist, the horseman emerged. He was a tower of blackened steel and burning silence. The helm floated where no head should be, its eye slits alight with cold blue fire. His jagged blade, veined with still dripping blood, dragged sparks from the earth with every step. His mount breathed smoke and fire, its hooves leaving behind prints that smoldered. They came to a halt inches from Silas. Neither moved. Neither spoke. But Silas reached into his coat slowly and pulled forth a scroll, sealed with black wax. His final written orders from the Order of the Cleansing Flame. He dropped it into the dirt and crushed it beneath his boot. A symbolic execution. "I know who you were," Silas said, his voice low. "Eridor Varn, Knight of Sigmar, betrayed, sacrificed, twisted into judgment." The blue flame in the helm flared. "I've read the book, the Veritas Inflamma," he continued. "You are bound by vengeance, but there is a way out." Still silence. "You're being hunted," Silas said, "by Tzeentch's chosen, the bearer of Merath's edge. They want to turn you into a weapon, a pawn, again." The horseman raised his blade, not to strike, but as if weighing the words. Silas took a breath. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to help you burn the rot from within, together." The wind shifted. And then, without a sound, the horseman nodded once. That night, the fires of justice were lit. Silas rode a black steed through the chaos-ridden outskirts of Grunewald, where the remnants of the cult's outer circle skulked like parasites. With him, always near, always silent, rode the rider, his cursed helm glowing like a comet of judgment in the fog. Their first target was House Vreden, a noble estate now a den of mutation and blasphemy. They entered through the upper balconies, Silas cutting down a guard before he could raise a cry. Blood painted the stone. Down below, masked cultists danced around a writhing beast, once a man, now a mass of mouths and tendrils, singing Tzeentch's praise. Silas raised his pistol and fired into the brazier, igniting the beast's ichor-slick flesh. As screams erupted, the horseman descended like a falling star. He cleaved through the crowd, blade glowing with spectral energy, every strike removing limbs, heads, entire histories in a single arc. One cultist's skull burst like an overripe fruit, another's body folded inside out, then exploded in blue flame. One woman tried to run, Silas shot her through the knee, then watched the horseman behead her in mid-scream. They moved on, to the manor's cellar, where children with hollow eyes whispered prophecy. One raised her hand, speaking in a voice older than God's. "He will fall. The blade will bite his soul." The horseman stopped. For a moment, the fire in his helm flickered. Silas stepped forward, drove his knife into the girl's throat. She died with a smile. "They know your weakness," he said. "We kill them all. No prophecy survives." The rider gave no response, but resumed his slaughter. By dawn, 10 strongholds burned. Silas, soaked in blood not his own, stood beside a ruin still hissing with embers. The sun rose red behind the smoke. He turned to the horseman. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. "Something changing, the fire inside. It's not just rage anymore." The rider tilted his head. Somewhere, something beneath the cursed helm remembered. Silas stepped closer. "I've seen the truth. Your curse isn't eternal, but it will be, unless you choose to stop before they chain you again. The cult has one final sanctuary. The man who holds Meroth's edge is waiting." He placed his hand on the rider's gauntlet. "Flesh and steel. Let's finish this. One more ride, then choose." A long silence. And then the horseman turned toward the east, toward the bleeding horizon. Together they rode into the rising sun. Vengeance and salvation, side by side. Chapter 11. Ashes of Faith. The Temple of Sigmar at Hochdorf stood tall for 3 centuries, its gilded spire rising defiantly above the surrounding villages like a hammer raised to the heavens. Pilgrims came from all across Reichland to kneel at its obsidian altar, to feel the sacred fire of the God-King warm their souls. Now it was bleeding fire and screaming stone. It began during morning prayers. The bell tolled once, then never again. From the clouds above, once clear and silver, came a roiling storm of feathers and smoke. Birds fell from the sky, dead mid-flight, their wings burnt to ash and beaks cracked open in agony. A priestess wept as she held one, only for it to twitch and speak in her own voice, "He sees your faith. He smiles at your blindness." The priests barely had time to form a prayer when the first explosion tore through the cloisters. Stained glass shattered into deadly petals, piercing flesh, eyes, and soft organs. Acolytes staggered, screaming, as twisted figures burst through the sacred doors, cultists robed in robes of impossible hues, masks of mirrored bone, weapons made of flesh and ink. Leading them was a woman known only as Eldra the Unbound, a former inquisitor turned prophet of the Changer. Her body floated a foot above the ground, her skin transparent, revealing organs that glowed with forbidden runes. Her mouth split vertically, and from it came a shriek that shattered the choir's harmonium and split one priest's skull like a melon. "Burn the altar," she commanded. "Defile the cradle." The sacristy fell first. Brother Halvorn stood defiant at the doors, great warhammer in hand. He crushed the skull of the first cultist across the threshold, then the second, but the third carried a jar of screaming flame. He hurled it into Halvorn's chest. The flame did not burn his flesh. It invaded it. Halvorn screamed as feathers burst through his ribs, eyes became mouths, and he staggered back, half man, half avian horror, crying prayers to Sigmar as his voice twisted into avian laughter. He exploded into a cyclone of wings and claws, tearing through his own brothers in a death spiral of corruption. At the altar, Father Aram knelt alone. He prayed even as the smoke darkened the sun, even as footsteps echoed closer. His hands trembled on the holy hammer, the last relic of the temple. Eldra approached. "You cannot stop fate," she whispered, bending low. Her face flickered like fire, young one moment, ancient the next. "You built this place atop the bones of heretics. Did you think their screams wouldn't echo?" Aram raised the hammer. Ayla smiled. He swung. She caught it with her mind. His arms shattered instantly, bone protruding from elbow, skin flaying open in ribbons. He collapsed to the marble floor, gasping. Ilra leaned down and kissed his forehead. His body folded into itself, compressing into a rune-etched gem that she swallowed whole. By the time the rider and Silas reached the outskirts, it was already too late. Smoke bled into the sky like ink. Fire danced atop holy towers. The spire of Sigmar cracked and fell, crashing into the courtyard with a sound like a world breaking. They rode through the smoke. Charred bodies littered the steps. One boy, no older than 12, lay with his ribs opened like a book, glyphs carved into each bone, his heart replaced with a whispering eye. Silas shot it. The eye burst, shrieking. From the central chamber came singing, discordant, high-pitched, joyful in its blasphemy. The cultists danced in the ruined sanctuary, bathing in blood pooled around the shattered altar. Aelra turned as the rider entered. Her grin widened. "You early, Eridor." The horseman raised his blade. She raised her hands. Steel clashed with sorcery. Silas opened fire, each shot blessed with holy writ. One cultist's head exploded like overripe fruit. Another's spine was turned to glass, shattering as he fell. The rider plowed through them like a storm, severing torsos, splitting spines, his blade glowing with vengeful hunger. But Aelra did not fall easily. She moved like smoke, dodging blows, countering with spells that warped the world. One strike made the ground turn into a wall of screaming mouths. Another reversed gravity for an instant, sending Silas crashing into a ceiling beam. Cordor grappled her in mid-air. Their struggle shattered the sacred brazier, and when he drove his blade through her stomach, she only smiled. "You are vengeance," she whispered, blood pouring like honey. "But you are also his. You always have been." She burst into 1,000 fragments, feathers scattering like ash in a whirlwind. The battle was over, but the temple was gone. The last sanctuary in the region reduced to a ruin of flame, screams, and cursed dust. Silas knelt by the broken altar, picking up a scorched Sigmarite pendant. He squeezed it tight. "Too late," he said bitterly. The rider stood motionless, and for the first time, the flame in the helm dimmed. Not from doubt, but from sorrow. Chapter 12. The Carnival of Eyes. It began with music, a melody so beautiful it made the heart ache, like memories of a mother's lullaby laced with euphoria and grief. It drifted across the villages, over rivers and stone walls, into noble keeps and squalid alleys alike, pulling at the subconscious, drawing in the desperate, the curious, the corrupt. They came in droves. From the starving poor to the jewel-draped lords, they arrived at Königsplatz, a ruined plaza near the imperial crossroads, once abandoned after a plague century ago. Now it had been reborn in grotesque splendor. At the center stood the Pavilion of Thousand Silks, a grand tent stitched from moving fabric, every strand alive with color and whispering threads. Around it spun dancers in masks, shaped like peacocks, moths, eyes, and stars. Gestures with smiles sewn into their cheeks tossed alchemical powders into the air, creating hallucinations that danced with the crowd. At first it was revelry. Wine flowed from fountains of silver. Tables of food constantly refilled themselves. Roasted boar with golden skin, fruits that shimmered, pastries that whispered secrets when bitten. Lust and laughter rippled beneath the canopy, and all masks were welcome. But then came the changing. It began slowly. A hand that twitched too often. Eyes that no longer blinked. A voice that sang in two harmonies at once. A noblewoman tore off her mask to reveal that it had fused to her face. A child's laughter became a shriek as his tongue unspooled into a scroll of screaming prophecy. One man who drank too deeply from the wine fountain began to vomit butterflies, each one bearing his face. And the music never stopped. The band was made of living instruments. Musicians fused into their lutes, their vocal cords stretched into flutes, their skin etched with runes that danced when played. One wept blood as he plucked strings strung with veins. At the heart of the madness stood the ringmaster, a towering androgynous figure in a mask of blinking eyes, their cloak made of living peacock feathers, each eye twitching. They raised their hand. The crowd fell silent. "Welcome, children of change," the ringmaster cooed. "Tonight you shed your final lies. Tonight you will see." The silk pavilion unfurled. Beneath it was a pit, and from the pit rose mutation made manifest. A lake of sentient flesh churned below, tendrils writhing with mouths and tongues, pulling the willing and the foolish into its embrace. Some danced into it, robes fluttering, faces beaming. Others were dragged, kicking and screaming. As they entered, their bodies bloomed like nightmares, arms becoming wings, torsos splitting into wheezing flutes, legs melting into slithering roots. Silas Drom, hidden among the massed crowd in tattered noble garb, watched with silent horror from a balcony of cracked marble. He'd followed rumors of the carnival here, and what he found was a cathedral of chaos disguised as joy. He clutched a vial of blessed fire in one hand, and a dagger etched with rune words in the other. Beside him, a flicker in the mist. The rider had arrived. No fanfare, no trumpet, just silence and dread. The music faltered. The ringmaster turned. "Oh, the guest of honor." Their many eyes blinked in unison. "He's finally come to dance." The horseman drew his blade. The ground split open with his step, and the blood of the earth boiled upward. Carnage erupted. The blade moved like an executioner's hymn, elegant, swift, final. The first cultist who charged him was sliced from crown to groin, his upper halves sliding apart like a rotten fruit. The second exploded into a cloud of maggots and teeth. Silas leapt from the balcony, landing in a roll, stabbing a masked woman in the throat, only to discover her blood had become writhing script, trying to burrow into his skin. He set it ablaze with the blessed vial. The dancers turned on each other, flesh unraveling, masks fusing, laughter rising in insane pitch. One man grew 10 legs, galloping in circles as he screamed in 4 languages. Another vomited a second version of himself, which immediately tried to eat the original. The ringmaster descended from above like a spider, limbs outstretched, face a riot of blinking eyes and changing mouths. "You cannot slay joy," they shrieked. "You are the herald of change." The horseman caught the ringmaster's staff mid-swing and drove his blade through their chest, only to find no heart within. The ringmaster laughed, splitting into 7 identical forms, each grotesquely mutated. Silas tossed a consecrated grenade. The explosion turned the central pit into a cauldron of fire and gore, the silks igniting like paper, eyes bursting across the canopy as the entire pavilion collapsed. Screams filled the night. The carnival burned. But the ringmaster's voice echoed, even in the fire. "We are the mirror. You are the blade, and your mask will fall." As the final embers drifted skyward, Silas stood among the corpses and weeping mutations, clutching his side where a ribbon-like tongue had grazed him. The rider said nothing. The fire in his helm had dimmed, just slightly. Chapter 13. A Pact of Iron and Bone. The world burned quietly around them. The carnival of eyes lay in smoldering ruin, flesh melted into the cobbles, bone trees, weeping ichor, and silk ashes floating like petals across the dead. The fires had consumed the laughter, silenced the music, but they could not extinguish the lingering echoes of madness, Some of the victims still twitched, their bodies long dead but their minds trapped in Tzeentch's illusions, endlessly laughing or screaming, or both. Silas Drom stood among them, panting, covered in blood not his own. His coat was torn, one eye nearly swollen shut, and a deep bite wound bled beneath his ribs, left by a cultist who spoke only in riddles as he gnawed flesh from his side. Behind him, unmoving, loomed Eridor, the Headless Horseman, his cursed helm glowing softly with restrained fury. The blade he held dripped with a dark ichor that refused to touch the ground, instead hissing in the air, curling like smoke caught in reverse. Silas turned to him slowly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. The flames around them flickered, as if listening. "No more slaughter for slaughter's sake," Silas continued. "No more riding down the damned without understanding who sent them. You've been manipulated, played like a blade in someone else's hand." The rider did not move. "I've seen the texts. I've read the Veritas. I know about your curse. About what Valtryek did to you." The helm tilted slightly. "You're not just a ghost. You're a weapon with purpose. But if we're going to end this, if we're going to stop what's coming, you have to choose vengeance. That means something." The wind howled. Then the rider dismounted. The steed evaporated into mist and fire, leaving only Eridor's armored form, smoldering, silent, imposing. His footsteps cracked the stone beneath them as he approached. The cursed helm hovered inches above his shoulders, and the shadows inside glowed with a blue fire that pulsed in rhythm with a long-forgotten heartbeat. Silas held his ground. "I need your help," he said. "The cult's heart still beats. Their champion bears a blade older than you. Mayoreth's edge. They mean to bind you, reforge you, turn you into a living sigil of Tzeentch." Torol raised his blade slightly, not in threat, but in challenge. "And if I help you," he seemed to say, though no words passed his lips, "what then?" Silas reached into his coat and drew a dagger. Its hilt was carved from moorstone, the blade etched with names, his own among them. "Then I make a pact," he said. "Iron and bone. I help you find the cult's heart, you kill it, burn it, unmake it, and when it's done, you face yourself. You choose whether this curse ends with mercy or madness." Silas sliced the blade across his palm. Blood welled, dark, defiant, real. He offered his bleeding hand to Eridor. The horseman stared. The fire in the helm flared. Then Eridor reached forward. His gauntlet, blackened steel scorched with runes, grasped Silas's hand. The blood boiled on contact, searing pain shot through Silas's arm, and for an instant he saw visions, memories not his own. A young knight kneeling before Sigmar's altar. The betrayal. The chains. The scream as the helm locked onto his skull. Centuries of silence. Centuries of flame. And then it ended. The pact was sealed. Silas fell to one knee, gasping, his palm now branded with the raven mark, not in worship, but in bond. Eridor stepped back, his blade ignited with new purpose. They turned toward the north, toward the black mountains where the cult's citadel loomed, hidden behind illusion, guarded by monsters of flesh and dream. A final ride awaited. A reckoning. Together they rode, man and monster, vengeance and will, bound by oath, fire, and blood. Chapter 14. The Siege of Greifenwald. Greifenwald had always been a town of stern stone and thicker faith, nestled against the southern edge of the Blackspine Mountains. Its walls were tall, its watchmen vigilant, and its chapel of Sigmar held relics older than memory. For centuries it had withstood beastmen raids, mutant cult uprisings, and even the occasional orc warband. But nothing prepared it for this. Nothing ever could. It began at dusk. The sky turned violet, then deep blue, then black, before the sun had even set. The wind died, the forest surrounding the town groaned. And then the screaming began. From the tree line surged a tide of chaos, a seething, gibbering flood of flesh, bone, and blasphemy. They were not warriors. They were spawns, warp-born horrors, X-Men, warped beyond recognition by the touch of Tzeentch. One crawled on 1,000 infant limbs, its face a stretched, yawning beak that vomited insects. Another dragged its belly across the ground like a slug, its spine curling out of its back like a twisted tree. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, each one more revolting than the last. Behind them came the true horrors. Screamers of Tzeentch, flamers, and gibbering flocks of mutant birds, all shrieking in tongues that seared the mind. Drakwald's defenders fired volleys from the walls, arrows, bolts, black powder, even blessed shot. It barely slowed them. Captain Lucas Eberhardt shouted orders atop the battlements, face pale but defiant. "Hold the line, hold." A warp-fire blast from a flamer struck the parapet, and half his men were reduced to molten shadows, screaming as their skin peeled like wax. The gate began to groan under the weight of corruption. In the town square, children wept as mothers clutched them close. Priests chanted protection rites that flickered and failed. The relics began to bleed. And then a horn sounded, low, deep, like death calling to war. Out of the west, through the ash-thick fog, a single rider emerged. The Headless Horseman, clad in his scorched armor, blue fire bleeding from his floating helm, blade gripped in gauntleted hand. He should have brought fear. Instead, he brought silence. The townspeople stared. The guards froze. Even the cult-born horrors hesitated, something primal in their degenerate brains recognizing the presence of death incarnate. Eridor raised his sword and charged. He struck the spawn like a divine hammer. His first swing cleaved 3 monstrosities clean in half, their insides spilling like boiling tar and worms. He trampled another underfoot, its bloated body rupturing with a wet scream. His blade hummed as it cut through mutated bone and cursed flesh, glowing brighter with each kill. A screamer dove from above. He grabbed it mid-air, crushed its skull with his bare hand, and hurled it into a group of flamers, their bodies detonating in a whirlpool of blue fire. The chaos horde surged. He welcomed them. They climbed over him, tried to drag him down, but Eridor became a whirlwind of execution, his armor seared but unyielding, his helm flaring with judgmental flame. He didn't just fight them. He punished them. From the walls, Captain Eberhardt and his men watched in stunned awe. What is he?" one soldier asked, voice trembling. "A demon?" muttered another. "No," Eberhardt said, slowly lowering his pistol. "Not a demon. Not today." The tide began to break. Ori reached the center of the horde. He lifted his sword to the sky, and from his helm a roar erupted, not sound but force, a thunderclap of righteous fury. The spawn within a dozen yards burst like rotted fruit, their bodies unraveling into dust and screams. The rest fled. Those that could. Some clawed at their own faces, trying to rid themselves of his image burned into their minds. Others simply ran until their mutated limbs failed. In the aftermath, silence returned. The fires still smoldered. The walls still bled. But Drakwald still stood. Eridor strode through the gates, blade in hand, blood and ichor steaming from his armor. Children hid behind their mothers. Priests clutched their relics. Then, one girl, her dress torn, her hands bloodied, stepped forward. "Thank you," she whispered. The fire in Eridor's helm dimmed slightly. He looked at her. and for a moment the flames in his helm ceased. A flicker of memory, a moment of peace. Then he turned. The horse formed beneath him, coalescing from smoke and fire. And he rode once more, leaving behind stunned silence and a town saved by a monster the Empire once feared. Chapter 15. Tzeentch Puzzle Box. The altar of whispers stood at the heart of the Worm Spire, a crumbling tower deep within the ashen cradle, a region so twisted by magic that even the winds had names and appetites. Here, Silas and Eridor had tracked the cult's trail to its root, the place where Baron Valthric's last recorded artifact had been hidden. Not a weapon, not a tome, but a puzzle box. It sat on a pedestal of glimmering bone, rotating slowly above a basin filled with blood that refused to settle, its surface shifting like an oil-slicked sea. The box itself was a cube of brass and flesh, each side covered in arcane sigils, clicking gears, and scratched mirrors that showed not the viewer, but the viewer's worst memory. Silas stood over it, brows knit, pistol drawn but useless. "This is it," he whispered. "This is how we learn the truth." Eridor said nothing, but the fire within his helm dimmed to a flicker, as if even the damned have limits to what they want to remember. The puzzle box turned once, and the past opened, not as vision, but as immersion. Silas and Eridor were pulled into it, their minds shackled to the memory made manifest. They stood again at Fort Varenthal. The sky above was a boiling mess of smoke and storm. The walls screamed with the clash of steel and the unnatural cries of chaos. Eridor, still a man, stood atop the battlements, helmet on, sword slick with blood, his golden cloak shredded but flying proud. Beside him stood his liege, Baron Valthric, and around them the traitors. The full truth bloomed like a poisoned flower. Valthric turned. "They will not take this fort. You know what must be done." Eridor shook his head. "The civilians are still inside. Half the garrison fights for you. The gate holds." Valthric's face twisted, not in fear but in cold, calculating resignation. "This is not about victory. It's about power." From beneath his cloak he drew a scroll sealed in warpskin, the rune of Tzeentch visible to any eye now. "I made a pact. For our future. For order. For control." Eridor stepped back. "You are the final offering," Valthric whispered. "Your blood is pure, your soul unbroken. You are perfect." Eridor struck him, hard, knocking the Baron into the wall. His sword was drawn. But the guards surrounding them didn't move, because they weren't guards anymore. Their flesh shimmered, their armor flaked into scales and feathers. They were already his. They fell on Earth with chains of silver fire binding him. One drove a burning spike through his leg. Another crushed his helm. They beat him until he bled from his eyes, until he screamed Valthric's name like a curse. They dragged him into the ritual chamber where the cursed helm awaited, the thing that would make him eternal. And he remembered it all. The screams of the villagers locked behind the gate, the children burning, the oath he took, his last words to the altar of Sigmar before he fell. "Let my soul burn if I fail them. Let my fire never die until vengeance is done." Tzeentch listened and twisted it. The vision ended in fire. Silas and Eridor fell backward from the puzzle box, gasping, shaking. The relic spun rapidly now, laughing in tongues, before crumbling to ash on the pedestal. Silas sat up slowly, blood leaking from his nostrils. "He sacrificed you, not to win, but to cover his own pact." Eridor stood, motionless, but his gauntlets cracked from the pressure in his fists. The flames in his helm were no longer blue. They were white, pure, searing, apocalyptic. The past was not mystery now. It was fuel, And the heart of the cult, the last place Valthric had been seen, lay just beyond the ashen cradle. "Now," Silas said, voice raw, "we kill him." Eridor turned, and for the first time in centuries a voice, not spoken but forged in thought and agony, spoke through the flame. "Yes." Chapter 16. The Return to the Fortress of Betrayal. The sky bled purple over the wastelands of Valthric, a horizon torn apart by warp storms, jagged mountains, and the yawning mouths of chasms that whispered in ancient tongues. There were no birds, no beasts, no sound but the wind, a wind that moaned with human voices, trapped echoes of those who had wandered too far into the ashen cradle and never returned. And in the center of this cursed land stood Castle Valthric. Once a noble fortress carved into a black mountain ridge, it had been transformed over the centuries into a monolithic cathedral to Tzeentch, a profane amalgam of architecture and mutation. The towers now twisted like serpents, their stones etched with glowing runes that pulsed like veins. The walls were no longer mortar and brick, but bone and screaming flesh, shifting constantly, never the same shape twice. At its heart, like a tumor, pulsed the throne spire, where Baron Drakwald Valthric ruled, not as a man, but as something far worse. Eridor and Silas Drom stood at the ridge, watching the blasphemous citadel squirm in the distance. The horseman's helm burned with white fire, brighter than ever before. Every footstep he took scorched the ground. The weight of memory, of betrayal, of pain, of wrath, seemed to drag the air into his orbit. He was not just a knight now. He was fire wearing armor, vengeance wearing silence. Silas checked his pistol, each blessed round etched with runes of banishment, purification, and hate. He held a satchel across his back, filled with relics and poisons forbidden even by the Inquisition. "Are you ready?" he asked. The rider said nothing. He began walking, and the earth itself recoiled. The outer lands surrounding Castle Valthric were infested with failures of summoning, semi-demonic beasts, fused with screaming men, dragging themselves across the landscape like wounded animals made of cancer and sin. They saw Eridor. They attacked. The first was a mass of teeth and arms, its core a baby's face weeping pus. Eridor didn't hesitate. His blade cut through it like water, severing limb, bone, and soul in one blow. The creature split apart, its internal organs detonating into screaming shadow flies that dissolved before touching his armor. Silas took on the next, a spidery abomination with legs of flayed noblewomen and a head that recited lies. He pinned it to a rock, drove a blessed iron rod through its eye, and watched it burn from the inside out, shrieking in a dozen languages as it melted into red mist. The land itself grew hostile. Rocks wept blood. Trees were made of tongues and tried to speak secrets no one should hear. Silas covered his ears, vomiting as one tree began to recite his sins, word for word, including those he'd never spoken aloud. Eridor simply struck it down with a backhanded swing. The tree howled and withered. They pressed forward. At the castle gates stood the gatekeeper. Not a man, not a demon. Something in between, a fusion of sorcerer and beast, its skin covered in parchment etched with the names of every soul sacrificed at Castle Valthric. Its mouth was stitched shut, but its hands were alive, long whip-like fingers that grew and shrank, each one ending in a different sacrificial tool. It lunged. Eridor caught it by the throat and drove his sword through its chest, but the creature did not die. Instead, it split into three, all screaming from their bellies, gushing blue fire and ink. Silas leapt into action, rolling beneath one's claws and jamming a silver spike into its spine. It spasmed, howling. Another swiped at Eridor and was caught mid-mation. The rider's blade sliced upward, splitting the beast from groin to skull, showering them in viscera. The last tried to flee. Eridor raised his hand. It burst into a pillar of white flame, consumed utterly. The gates groaned open, not mechanically, but in agony. The very walls of the castle screamed as they entered, as if their presence was an infection. They stepped inside. The interior of Castle Valthric was worse than any battlefield. It was a living maze of architecture and madness. Corridors shifted as they walked them, walls becoming mirrors, mirrors becoming mouths, mouths whispering every fear Silas had ever buried. The paintings along the walls moved in slow, grotesque detail. A knight's crucifixion, a child mutating, a priest drowning in his own faith. "Do not look too long," Silas whispered. "The castle is alive." Eridor did not respond. He walked straight to the throne spire. The final confrontation awaited. At its apex sat Valthric, no longer man, now something throned in truth, warped by Tzeentch's favor. But that would be Chapter 17. Chapter 17, The Eye of Change. The throne spire was not built, it was grown. Orid and Silas ascended a staircase that pulsed like a spinal column, each step sticky with coagulated knowledge. Pages of forbidden texts formed the carpet, their glyphs whispering as boots crushed them underfoot. The walls bled light, not warmth. Time bent strangely here. One blink felt like hours, another lasted less than breath. At the summit, beneath an obsidian archway that twisted into a weeping eye, they stepped into a chamber not meant for mortals. The throne hall of Castle Valthric was infinite and claustrophobic all at once. Its walls were alive, shifting with faces trapped in stone, mouths endlessly muttering prophecy and regret. Above, a ceiling of glass revealed stars that did not belong to this world, some moving like insects, others weeping blood. A choir of headless cherubs floated in circular motion, singing in reverse. And upon a dais of crystallized ash sat Baron Druger Valthric, or what remained of him. He was no longer human. He was the Eye of Change. Valthric's form shimmered, never the same from one breath to the next. One moment he wore his old noble garb, face handsome and proud. The next, he was a mass of feathered serpents with eyes for scales. Then, a withered corpse with 1,000 wings. Each change came with a pulse of magic that made Silas's bones ache and Eridor's helm flame-flicker violently. "Sir Eridor Varn," Valthric's voice echoed, from mouth, from air, from thought. "You've come home." Eridor raised his sword in silent fury, fire spiraling up the blade. Silas gritted his teeth, holy runes burning on his pistol grip. But Valthric only laughed. "I offered you eternity once. You called it betrayal. Yet look at what you've become." He stood, floated, his form coalescing into something almost humanoid, draped in robes of unwritten scripture, his face a blank porcelain mask. "You judge the wicked, but you do not see the strings. You are a harbinger, you are mine." The room convulsed, reality bent. Suddenly they were standing at the foot of Varenthal's walls again, surrounded by spectral fire and screaming villagers. Valthric stood beside Eridor, clean and noble, hand on his shoulder. "We could have ruled together. I gave you power, and you call it a curse?" Eridor dropped to one knee. For a moment Silas stepped forward. "Don't believe it," he growled. "This is Tzeentch's work. He's in Valthric now. Maybe he always was." Valthric turned, chuckling. "And what are you, little worm? A failed priest? A killer who coats his bullets in prayer to hide his bloodlust?" The chamber fractured again. This time, Eridor stood in the hall of Sigmar, helmet removed, kneeling as warrior priests applauded. He was whole, human, clean. His wife ran to him. She kissed his forehead. "I love you," she said. Valthric's voice whispered in his ear, "This can be yours. I will remove the helm, the curse. You will live. No more pain, no more fire. Only peace." Eridor reached out. Silas shouted, "It's a lie!" But Iria touched her hand, and the world shattered. She screamed, her flesh sloughing, her eyes becoming sockets of void, her lips splitting into 100 mouths, each chanting, "He rides for us." Valthric Node Tzeentch laughed. "You cannot escape fire. You are fire. Embrace it. Be my sword." And in that moment, the horseman did something he hadn't done in centuries. He spoke, a sound like thunder through bones. No. The flames in his helm erupted, purging illusion. The room was swallowed in blinding white. Valthric shrieked as the mirage cracked. Eridor rose, sword held high. "You made me this. But now you'll see what your blade can do." He charged. Silas followed, whispering a prayer. The final battle had begun. Chapter 18. Shatter the Chains. The chamber of the heart relic lay beneath the throne spire, buried beneath layers of reality warped by centuries of sorcery, betrayal, and blood sacrifice. Its walls were not built, but grown, roots of cursed iron coiling like intestines, pulsing with living hatred. The floor was glassy obsidian, beneath which souls churned, silent and dismembered. In the center of it all stood the relic itself, a suspended, pulsating core of flesh and brass, shaped like a heart, yet veined with ink and flame, each throb sending waves of raw magic through the air. It wasn't just a power source. It was the anchor of the curse, Eridor's eternal leash to Tzeentch. Above it hung chains made of runes, each link formed from a broken oath, each inscribed with the names of those who had betrayed, slain, or bound him, among them Valthric, Tzeentch, Eridor himself. Eridor stood before it, sword in hand, his helm blazing with fire so intense it cracked the stone beneath his feet. But he could not lift the blade. His arms trembled. For the first time, the unkillable, unstoppable horseman hesitated. Silas limped forward, half dead, bleeding from a dozen wounds inflicted during their battle through Valthric's inner sanctum. His coat was torn, eye bruised shut, arm dangling from a broken shoulder. "Why do you stop?" he rasped. Eridor didn't answer. The flames dimmed. "Because it's not just a relic, is it?" Silas breathed. "It's part of you. It's your pain, your oath, your rage, your curse. Killing it means killing what kept you going." The fire flickered again. "No one's ever forgiven you," Silas said. "Not Sigmar, not the Empire, not yourself." He took a step forward. "I can't end this for you, but I can help you remember who you were." And then he did the unthinkable. Silas drew a sacred blade, etched with the names of Sigmar's martyrs, and plunged it into his own palm, bleeding directly onto the relic. The chamber convulsed. The relic screamed, not in sound but in emotion, fear, fury, hunger. It recoiled from Silas's blood, untainted by chaos, but heavy with sin, pain, and sacrifice. Eridor's flame reignited. White-hot, blinding. He raised his blade. With a thunderous cry like the final trumpet of an avenging angel, he brought the sword down, cleaving the relic in two. The explosion was not physical. It was spiritual. Reality folded inward, then erupted in a tsunami of raw memory. Visions lashed through the chamber, Eridor's death, his oath, the fire that had sustained him for centuries, the innocents he saved, the cultists he obliterated, the guilty he judged. And then, darkness. The relic was gone. The chains were shattered. Eridor dropped to his knees. His blade dimmed, then extinguished. The helm lowered, its flames snuffed. Silas crawled forward, coughing blood, hand over his chest where something inside had cracked from the effort. He looked up, hope flickering in his swollen face. "Is it done?" he croaked. Eridor turned. The helm hovered still, but the fire reignited. Not blue, not white, but gold, like a dying sun, a memory of purity. And Silas knew. The relic was destroyed, but the curse remained, because the curse wasn't just forged by Valthric. It wasn't just powered by chaos. It was Eridor, his rage, his failure, his oath, "Let my fire never die until vengeance is done." He had kept it. He was it. And there were still betrayers to burn. Silas slumped back against the cracked altar. Eridor stood again, but not as a puppet, not as a tool, now as a choice. "I tried," Silas said softly. "You did," the voice replied, no longer thunder, no longer a scream, but a man. Chapter 19. The Final Hunt. The cursed relic lay in ruin. The chamber of chains had fallen silent, but the castle still breathed. Its heartbeat pulsed from above, steady, growing louder with each second. The walls bled thick ichor, flowing upward toward the throne of ascension, a chamber none had entered since Valthric surrendered his soul to Tzeentch. Now the final game would be played. Silas, too weak to stand, leaned against the cold stone, hand pressed to a broken rib. His eyes followed the towering shape of Eridor, whose golden fire still burned in the floating helm. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Eridor turned and ascended the staircase. Every step was a funeral bell. The throne of ascension was not a room. It was a wound in reality, pulsing with divine filth. The air was thick with spells too ancient for language. Columns of bone spiraled infinitely upward, while the floor beneath shimmered like obsidian water, reflecting not images, but sins. At the far end, seated on a throne of fused corpses and screaming chains, waited Baron Drakwald Valthric, or what remained of him. He had become a daemon host, a living shell for a greater daemon of Tzeentch, bound not by sorcery, but by pact. His body had bloated beyond recognition, skin translucent, veins glowing like arcane serpents. His lower half had fused with the throne itself, roots of bone and spellflesh holding him aloft, like a blasphemous idol. His head had split into three. One face still bore Valthric's smug nobility. One was a beaked avian horror, eyes blinking vertically. The last was Eridor's face, twisted into a mockery, eternally screaming. When he spoke, all three mouths moved in disharmony. "You've come far, my knight. But I made you. I raised you from death. You are my blade, whether you swing it or not." Eridor said nothing. He stepped into the pool of sins. His reflection screamed. Valthric rose from the throne, his voice thick with sorcerous glee. "I gave you purpose, and now I offer you freedom. Kneel, and I shall sever the last link. You will be free of fire, free of fate." He stretched out one grotesque limb, a hand fused with quills and eyes. Eridor charged. Steel screamed. The two clashed in a blast of warp energy and consecrated fire. The ground fractured, the ceiling bled molten sigils, and the throne behind them wailed as Eridor's blade met Valthric's mutated claws. The demon host moved with inhuman speed, tentacles lashing, tongues hissing forbidden incantations. One blow shattered a pillar, another ripped a gouge in Eridor's side, molten blood sizzling into the floor. Eridor struck back. His blade cleaved through arms, eyes, spells made solid. Valthric's avian face howled, casting a blast of illusion that rewrote the chamber. Suddenly, Eridor stood in his old home, wife and children running to embrace him. He hesitated. Only a second. A claw struck him across the helm, sending him flying into the wall with a bone-breaking crunch. "You cannot kill me," Valthric growled, each head echoing. "You are still bound to me. Every oath you swore, every life you took in vengeance, it feeds me." Eridor rose. His sword trembled in his grip. The fire in his helm pulsed, flickering between gold and blue. And then he lowered his blade, not in surrender, in choice. "I am no longer yours," came the voice, not thunder, but clarity. "I am not your blade," Valthric hissed. "Then die like the traitor you are." The demon host lunged, and Eridor stepped aside. Silas, crawling in from the shadows with his last sanctified spear, drove it into Valthric's spine. The demon host screamed, thrashing violently. Eridor took the opening. With a final blinding swing, he cleaved Valthric in half from shoulder to hip, splitting the monstrous body like a diseased fruit. Warflame exploded outward. The throne cracked. The towers shook. The screams of daemons erupted across the sky. And Valthric, Baron, traitor, daemon host, only ash remained. Silas collapsed, unconscious, breath shallow. Eridor stood alone amid the ruin, fire slowly fading. But he was still there, still cursed, because some vengeance cannot be extinguished, only endured. Chapter 20, Twilight Ride. The winds howled through the shattered remains of Castle Valthric, carrying the acrid stench of warped blood and charred sin across the ashen cradle. The sky wept fire, trails of crimson and violet streaking across the heavens like the last convulsions of a god's dying breath. At the heart of the broken throne room, amid black glass and seared bone, stood Sir Eridor Varn. His blade hung loosely in one gauntleted hand, its once holy runes now cracked and flickering with unstable light. His armor was fractured, plates seared black, rivets glowing like coals. The cursed helm still hovered above his neck, burning faintly with a tired gold fire. Before him lay only ash. The thing that had been Baron Druger Valthric was no longer anything at all. Not flesh, not daemon. Just a twisted pile of slag and shattered bone, crackling faintly with the remnants of demonic essence, rapidly dissolving in the wake of its master's death. The sword had ended him, but not the curse. Silas Drom, battered and bloody, dragged himself upright against a pillar, coughing violently. He clutched his side, blood leaking between his fingers, but his eyes remained fixed on Eridor. "You did it," he rasped, half-choked. "It's over. Valthric's dead. The heart's destroyed. The chains are gone." Eridor didn't speak. He turned slowly, the flames in his helm flickering, not with fury, but with something colder, sadder. He walked through the chamber in silence, every step crunching through memories made solid, scorched banners, warped stone, melted masks of nobility. Silas limped forward. "You're free now, aren't you? We ended it." Eridor stopped. And then, softly, more gently than Silas could have imagined, he shook his head. No. His voice was deeper now, hollow yet resolute. A voice no longer driven by fire alone, but by purpose. "I will never be free. The oath still binds me." Silas staggered, his face creased with fury and disbelief. "You fulfilled it. You avenged your death. You killed the traitor. The god is banished." Orio's gaze drifted to the broken sword in his hand. "No," he whispered. "The oath was never vengeance, it was protection. It was the promise I failed to keep." He looked toward the east, where the mountains cast long shadows over the Empire's border, where the road still wound through forests and the whispers of Tzeentch cults still festered in corners unseen. "There are more," he said. "Too many, and still too few to stop them." Silas took a step forward. "You can stop now. Let the Empire defend itself. Let mortals carry the burden." Gabor turned his helm slightly, flames glowing like the last ember of a forge. "I am mortal no longer. I am justice unrealized. I am the vow that never breaks. So long as chaos walks among the living, I will ride." And then, without a word, his steed formed again from smoke and fire, hooves blazing as they touched the stone. The mount neighed, low and guttural, like a forge sighing into life. Eridor mounted one final time. The helm flared, the blade reformed, shattered steel becoming whole once more, glowing with a light both holy and cursed. Silas watched, unable to speak. "Tell them," Eritre's said, voice echoing in his mind. "Tell them the horseman is real. Tell them the oath of Sigmar still stands." He turned to the open gates and rode into twilight. Epilogue. Hooves in the fog. The year was 2527 IC, and though the Empire knew no peace, Rakeland had grown quiet. Too quiet. The chaos cults were driven deeper underground, the great warbands dispersed or slain, and though the scars of the great betrayal still marked the land, the people began to speak of something else. Something whispered between ale mugs and behind prayer-room doors. Eridor. It began in Ostbrook, a small hamlet tucked beneath the boughs of the Drakwald, a place once ruled by fear, where disappearances were nightly affairs and strange laughter drifted on the fog. The locals dared not speak of what festered in their cellars, until one morning they found the town square soaked in blood, not of innocence, but of 3 noblemen, dragged from their manors, nailed to the old oak, with their tongues removed and sewn to their own chests. Above them, carved into the bark, were the words, he writes, "In Hochheim, a corrupt priest of Sigmar, secretly a handler for a coven of cultists, held nightly baptisms that turned to screams before dawn. One night the bell tower rang without a hand to toll it. The priest was found disemboweled in the confessional, entrails braided into the shape of the twin-tailed comet. Witnesses spoke of a low fog rolling in, unnatural and thick as soup, and the sound of hooves. Near the burnt ruins of Moore's Hollow, a child claimed to see a man with no head guarding the graveyard. The townsfolk laughed, until the girl led them to a fresh pit. Inside lay 11 corpses, their skin warped, eyes black, mouths smiling too wide. Old cultists, each with a coin on their forehead, branded with the word oathbreaker. The rumors grew. They spoke of a knight clad in ash-black steel, his helm ablaze with eternal fire, floating where no head should rest. Of a mount that breathed fog and smoke, whose hooves never touched mud, but left burned prints wherever it walked. Of a blade that screamed as it struck, forged not from steel, but regret and wrath. They said he appeared in silence. He never spoke. Until the end. Only when the wicked knelt, weeping, begging for mercy they'd never given, did he lean close, and whisper in a voice like a dying forge, "Remember the oath." Then judgment fell. Silas Drawn never returned to the order. He wandered the borderlands, half-healed, half-whole, carrying a book of names and a map of sins. He followed rumors like embers on the wind, and though he never saw the rider again, he sometimes woke at night to the sound of hooves in the fog, distant and fading. Each time he whispered a prayer, not to Sigmar, but to a man who burned for the world when the world had abandoned him. And somewhere, beneath a sky forever twilight, atop hills soaked in ancient blood, Eridor rides. No longer just vengeance, no longer just curse. but memory of loyalty, of sacrifice, of the promise broken by kings and gods, and upheld only by a ghost. The last night of the oath, he rides,